Sometimes, the most impossible connections are the ones that feel the most real. She looked at me like I was a dream, like I couldn't possibly exist. But in that moment, everything changed. The rain tapped gently against the windows of the small, cozy bookstore, a quiet sanctuary from the gray afternoon outside. Shelves stood tall and inviting, packed tightly with books that smelled of paper and time. I wandered through the aisles, my fingers lightly grazing the spines of poetry collections, looking for something that might spark the quiet fire I'd been chasing for months. The perfect words to capture feelings I hadn't yet fully understood. That's when I saw her. She stood near the back, in the worn corner where the oldest novels were kept. Her hair was a soft cascade of silver strands, framing a face that held stories of its own. Lines of laughter, traces of past sorrows, and an unshakable grace. She was leafing through a book, her fingers lingering on the pages like she was touching something precious, almost sacred. I wasn't sure why, but I found myself drawn to her presence, the calm certainty she seemed to carry without trying. She was beautiful in a way that wasn't loud or flashy, more like the quiet warmth of a late autumn afternoon, a gentle light that reached into the heart. Then, as if sensing me, she glanced up. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, I swear the world held its breath. There was something in her gaze, something almost disbelieving, like she was seeing me for the first time, as if I were a secret she hadn't dared to hope existed. It was a look that wasn't just surprise, it was something softer, more fragile. A silent question hovering between us, asking if this moment was real. I felt my pulse quicken, an unfamiliar flutter rising in my chest. The scent of old paper mixed with the faint trace of her perfume. Something floral, like jasmine and rain, and it settled around me like a whisper. I cleared my throat, suddenly shy, but the silence stretched on comfortably, as if we both understood that some things didn't need to be said aloud. She smiled then, small and knowing, and turned back to her book. But the way she held it now seemed different, less guarded, as if she'd let something new inside. I stepped closer, careful not to break the spell. "That's one of my favorites," I said quietly, nodding toward the book she held. Her eyes met mine again, this time softer, less surprised. "It's a story that stays with you," she replied. Her voice was warm, smooth like honey dripping slow, filling the space between us. I nodded, suddenly wanting to say more, but not knowing how. Instead, I just let the moment linger, the gentle rain outside, the quiet hum of the bookstore, and the unexpected connection that had sparked between two very different lives. As she looked at me, like I couldn't quite be real, I realized that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin in the smallest, most ordinary places that a week had passed since that quiet moment in the bookstore, yet the memory of her gaze lingered in my mind like the soft echo of a favorite song. So when I saw a small flyer pinned to a cafe window, announcing a local poetry reading that very evening, I felt an impulse I couldn't ignore. And when I arrived, I found her already there, sitting near the back, bathed in the dim glow of twinkling fairy lights that hung like stars above the wooden floorboards. The room was hushed except for the steady rhythm of voices reciting verses that spoke of longing, loss, and hope. I slipped into the seat beside her, careful to take the space she seemed to offer without rushing, without crowding. Her profile was peaceful, softened by the warm light, and the faint curl of a smile played at the corners of her lips. She glanced sideways at me, a flicker of surprise briefly crossing her eyes before she nodded an invitation, as if saying, "You're welcome here." Between readings, we talked quietly, our voices low, blending easily with the murmur of the cafe crowd. She shared lines from a poem she loved, her fingers tracing the edges of an imaginary book as she spoke, while I listened, fascinated by the gentle cadence of her words. Then, almost without thinking, her hand brushed against my arm. A fleeting touch, light as a whisper, but it sent a spark racing along my skin. I felt warmth bloom beneath her fingertips, a quiet reassurance that something fragile and new was unfolding between us. The air smelled of brewed coffee and vanilla candles, cozy and inviting, wrapping us in a small world of shared moments. I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume again, delicate and timeless, like a secret she carried just for herself. Her eyes met mine once more, and in that gaze there was a question, soft, hopeful, that invited me to stay, to lean in closer without fear. I felt the pull, a gentle tension in the silence between words, like a slow dance where every step mattered. I wanted to reach out, to hold that moment, but I held back, savoring the quiet intimacy that had grown between us. There was no rush, no need to rush, just the steady unfolding of two lives gradually weaving closer. When the last poem was read and the room began to stir with applause, she smiled, a warmth spreading through her eyes that mirrored the flutter in my chest. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, feeling more certain than I had in a long time that this was only the beginning. As we stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights glittered like scattered stars. The distance between us felt smaller somehow, a delicate thread connecting our hearts, waiting to be tugged gently into something more. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. We walked side by side through the park, the soft crunch of leaves beneath our feet punctuating the quiet between us. The sky above was a fading canvas of purples and pinks, the last light of day slipping away like a whispered secret. There was a gentle tension in the space between us, an unspoken dance of hope and hesitation. I could feel it in the way her steps faltered just slightly when a cool breeze swept past, causing her to wrap her scarf tighter around her neck. It was a small gesture, but it drew my attention like a beacon. As we rounded a bend beneath the tall oaks, she paused to adjust her scarf, her fingers trembling just enough to betray a quiet vulnerability. Our eyes met in that fleeting moment, and I felt the air thicken with unspoken words. My heart caught in my throat, the pulse in my neck pounding as if it wanted to break free and speak for me. Her hand hovered just inches from mine, and I could see the hesitation in her gaze, the invisible barrier built from years of guarded emotions and careful restraint. I wanted to reach out, to close that space, but something held me back. The delicate balance of what was and what could be was too fragile to rush. Instead, I let my fingers brush against the rough bark of a nearby tree, grounding myself in the moment. The scent of damp earth rose up, mixing with the crisp air and the subtle fragrance she carried, the faintest hint of jasmine, calming and familiar. She looked away, her breath visible in the cooling air, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. "It's been a long time since I've felt this unsettled," she said softly, her voice barely above the rustling leaves. I nodded, understanding more than she said. Sometimes the hardest things to face are the ones that make us feel most alive. Her eyes met mine again, steady but searching. There was a vulnerability there, a willingness to open a door, just a crack, but fear of what lay beyond. I wished I could give her the courage she needed, but I knew that trust was something she had to find on her own. For a moment, we simply stood there, two souls caught between the past and the possibility of something new. The world around us faded into the background. The distant hum of the city, the soft rustle of trees, the fading light, all dissolving into a quiet space where only we existed. Then, as if breaking an unspoken agreement, her hand finally reached out, brushing lightly against mine. Not a grasp, but a gentle promise. The touch was electric and tender all at once, sending warmth through my veins and quieting the storm inside. We resumed walking, fingers still nearly touching, hearts both racing with the weight of what had passed and the hope of what was yet to come. The soft glow of candlelight filled the room, casting gentle shadows that danced across the walls like whispered memories. Her apartment was a sanctuary, warm and inviting, filled with the scent of jasmine and old books. I sat across from her at the small wooden table, a steaming cup of tea cradled between my hands, its warmth a quiet comfort against the cool evening air drifting in through the open window. The music played softly in the background, a delicate melody that seemed to echo the tentative rhythm of our conversation. We had crossed an invisible line tonight, one where small talk gave way to something deeper, something honest. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting both strength and vulnerability, as if weighing the decision to share a piece of herself long hidden. After a pause, her voice was soft but steady. There were years when I thought I'd lost myself, moments when loneliness felt like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I listened, each word settling into the spaces between us, weaving a fragile bridge of trust. Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup, the motion slow, almost hypnotic. I felt the steady rise and fall of her breath, the faint warmth radiating from her skin even across the table. "It's strange," she continued, "how life can build walls around your heart. Walls made of fear, regret, and things you wish you could undo. But sometimes those walls crack. Sometimes a chance encounter, or a simple smile, reminds you there's still light." Her gaze held mine, steady and unflinching. The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord deep inside me, stirring a tenderness I hadn't expected. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but instead I let my hand rest lightly on the table, fingers inching closer to hers. When our hands finally met, it was a quiet, electric touch, her skin soft and warm beneath mine. The world around us seemed to fade, leaving only the gentle pressure of her fingers against mine, a silent promise that she was opening a door. I felt my own walls beginning to crumble, swept away by the honesty and courage she was offering. "Thank you for trusting me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "It's easier when you don't have to be alone anymore." The room was filled with a peaceful stillness, the kind that only comes after years of longing and waiting. We sat there, hands entwined, sharing the quiet intimacy of two souls carefully unfolding toward each other. Outside, the night deepened, stars twinkling softly in the velvet sky. Inside, the warmth between us grew, a tender flame that promised new beginnings, born from the courage to be seen and to see. The sunlight spilled gently through the wide windows of the cafe, casting a golden glow that seemed to soften everything it touched. The quiet hum of conversations, the clinking of cups, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around us like a familiar song. We sat across from each other at a small corner table, the world bustling around but somehow feeling miles away. She laughed, a sound that was at once light and rich, filling the space between us with a warmth that settled deep inside me. Her eyes sparkled as she told a story, the kind that made her whole face come alive, every gesture graceful and sincere. I found myself watching the way her lips moved, the gentle curve of her smile, and the subtle way her hand brushed against her hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. When she reached across the table to pick up her coffee cup, her fingers barely touched my arm, a fleeting contact, soft and electric. The warmth of her skin lingered, and I caught my breath, suddenly aware of the growing tension in the space between us. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, a gentle pull that stirred something deep within, a yearning wrapped in tenderness and respect. I noticed how the sunlight caught the delicate lines around her eyes, signs of a life well lived but still full of quiet grace. She was beautiful, not in a way that screamed for attention, but in a way that held steady, like the steady beat of a familiar song. There was a depth to her, a quiet strength that drew me closer, even as the years between us whispered their silent caution. Our conversation flowed easily, punctuated by smiles and pauses where words felt unnecessary. She leaned in slightly, the space between us shrinking just enough for me to feel the soft scent of her perfume, subtle and timeless, like a promise of something unspoken. At one point, her hand brushed again against my arm, this time a little longer, a little more deliberate. The simple touch sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder that beneath the gentle surface, desire was unfolding, a delicate dance of knowing glances, hesitant touches, and shared breaths. I wanted to reach out to hold her hand, to let her know that this feeling was mutual, but I held back, savoring the slow burn of it all. There was something sacred about this unspoken understanding, this quiet acknowledgement of what might be without forcing it into the light too soon. As we stood to leave, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk, she smiled softly and said, "I'm glad we're here." "Me too," I replied, my voice steady but filled with something more. "I want to see where this goes." Her eyes met mine, steady and warm, and in that moment, the distance between us felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, one we were both willing to cross, slowly, carefully, together. The rain was falling softly against the window panes, a steady, rhythmic tapping that filled the quiet apartment with a soothing melody. Inside, the room was warm and dim, lit only by the gentle glow of a few candles flickering on the low table. We sat close together on the couch, wrapped in a shared blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen. There was a comfort in the silence between us, a peacefulness that came from simply being near each other without the need for words. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and I felt the steady beat of her heart through the thin fabric of her sweater. It was a small, intimate sensation, unspoken but deeply grounding. She reached out slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket before resting lightly on my knee. The touch was soft, tentative, like a question waiting for an answer. I met her eyes, and in that quiet space, I saw the same mixture of hope and hesitation mirrored back at me. Our breaths mingled in the cool air, the faint scent of rain and jasmine weaving around us. The world outside faded away, the distant hum of the city, the patter of raindrops, leaving only the warmth of this shared moment. Her hand moved a little closer, fingertips brushing against my skin, sending a thrill that settled deep in my chest. It wasn't urgency or demand, but something far more tender, a gentle invitation to cross the line between friendship and something more. I swallowed the lump in my throat and let my fingers curl lightly around hers. The connection was electric and yet calm, a quiet promise held in the softness of our touch. Her eyes searched mine, seeking reassurance, and I gave it without words. For the first time, the age between us felt irrelevant. The years, the doubts, the fears, all dissolved into the space where our hands met, steady and sure. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing us to breathe in the fullness of this moment, to savor the delicate beginning of something that had been quietly growing all along. She leaned her head gently against my shoulder, and I felt the warmth of her cheek resting there, steady and real. The sound of her breathing, slow and even, was a balm to the restless ache I hadn't known I carried. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her a little closer under the blanket, feeling the softness of her hair against my skin. There was no rush, only the steady unfolding of trust, the slow blooming of affection that needed space to grow. In that quiet room, with rain tapping a lullaby against the glass, we crossed a threshold, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with the simple, profound act of being present with each other fully and without fear. The night held us gently, two souls no longer afraid to reach out and touch the possibility of love. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden rays that shimmered across the river's surface like scattered pieces of light. We walked slowly along the riverbank, the soft crunch of gravel beneath our feet mingling with the gentle rush of water beside us. The world around felt quiet and expansive, as if the city had paused just for us. Her hand found mine with effortless ease, fingers intertwining like old friends rediscovering each other. The touch was familiar and new all at once, steady, grounding, and full of unspoken promises. I felt the warmth of her palm, the softness of her skin, and the subtle pulse beneath that spoke of a heart open and willing. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, the delicate weight settling in a way that made everything else fade away. The scent of her hair, fresh with a hint of jasmine and rain, wrapped around me, a comforting presence that made me feel safe in a way I hadn't known I needed. As we walked, The conversation drifted gently between us, shared memories, hopes for the future, and quiet reflections on the journey that had brought us here. There was a peacefulness in her voice, a quiet joy that matched the steady rhythm of my own heart. I glanced down at her, taking in the subtle lines around her eyes that had deepened with laughter and time, the graceful curve of her smile that now felt like home. She caught my gaze and smiled back, a soft, knowing smile that spoke of acceptance, trust, and a love that had grown slowly but surely. Despite the world's whispers about the years between us, the differences that some might have seen as barriers felt irrelevant in this moment. What mattered was the connection we had forged, the respect, the tenderness, the shared understanding that transcended age and expectation. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of water and earth, and she tightened her grip on my hand, as if to say, "We're in this together." Her head rested more fully against my shoulder, and I felt the steady rise and fall of her breath, quiet, calm, and full of belonging. We paused to watch a family of ducks glide gracefully across the river, their smooth movement a reminder of how life flows best when allowed to unfold naturally. I squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "I'm glad it's you." Her smile deepened, and she looked up at me, eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and love. "Me too," she said softly. "There's no need for grand declarations here, just the simple truth that two people from different worlds and different times had found each other and chosen to walk forward side by side." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, we continued our slow walk along the riverbank, two hearts tethered by a quiet but unbreakable bond. Together, against the world, we were real,